did you go to school?
And here's your...
What do you think of what's going on right now, mate?
These evil little invisible parasites.
Satan-worshipping Freemason moron.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're not run by factions.
Get the fuck out of camera!
There are much more powerful international forces in play.
Is this pink eye? Is this what pink eye is? I don't fucking know what's happening.
Please go outside and look at the moon quickly.
It's been crazy, guys, but guess what? It's how it is, mate.
Mate, because I want to do you slowly.
But I ain't spending any time on it.
Welcome to the Conditional Release Program, a podcast that delves into the netherworld of cults, crims, and con artists. No, that was not Jack, that is Joel. And joining me today is Dave Burgess, who is a fellow cooker watcher who goes quite deep into these things, actually turns up to events, documents the fuck out of them. You may have seen some of his handiwork in the Conditional Release Program shitposting group, and he does some fucking excellent work in basically just keeping track of these more extremist elements of the movement and connecting the dots when it comes to a kind of cooker spillover into other causes. Now, one thing that I will mention here, because I need to somewhat segue in a beer plug, we have beers after rallies. We've gone to 2 rallies so far and we have beers, and there has been a shameful lack of CBCO tins in that situation. We'll go to a pub and it'll be something shit like 2 is new, and it's ruined the moment every time. So I think next time we need to make an effort to go to a local bottle-o after the rally and get at least a 4-pack of delicious, delicious CBCO. But the sad thing about that is that we won't get 10% off, will we? Because we'll be going to a terrestrial bottle shop, you know, like boomers. Whereas you, digital natives, if you put CRP10 into the checkout at the cbco.beer, you'll get 10% off. And they have free shipping, which is insane. I don't actually know how they make money off this. It is such a good price. We don't get anything. We don't get a cut. So don't do it for that reason. Do it because beer is delicious and it's actually amazingly well priced. So that's enough of that. Let's get back to basically just the sort of general vibe of cookers stinking their way into traditional forms of activism and what the fuck they're up to. But firstly, let's hear more about you and your backstory.
G'day, Joel. Yeah, well, I came to this in a weird way in that I lived in a fairly remote part of the Hunter Valley, leading into the pandemic, and I managed through various circumstances to enter lockdowns elsewhere.
Yep,
and be away from my community. And you know, in the lead up to the 2020 Trump election and through the first year of COVID, slowly watched this community I knew intimately getting peeled in huge numbers.
Yeah, that's
incredible numbers.
Yeah, okay.
And
shadow pandemic as such.
Yeah, and being away from them, and you know, there was a fairly unique set of circumstances leading into the pandemic in that we'd spent the previous 4 months basically watching the Gospers Mountain fire surround us and send us all mad. So there was already a heavy atmosphere even before COVID. And yeah, so spending the 2 sort of lockdowns in either Sydney or in Lake Macquarie when I started moving back locally. So, you know, it was pretty sort of heartbreaking watching people I thought I knew very well start to get very nasty. And, you know, my background is in politics. It's in the environment movement. So, you know, I wasn't unaware of what the freedom movement perhaps was before it was the freedom movement and the various individuals who were driving it.
Yep.
And, you know, previous histories with things like Reclaim Australia and going back even further, you knew the language and you knew the characters to know who was behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
But still, you know, all these people who I'd virtually grown up with, you know, sharing their material, I still had a bit of a belief that it could be frustration at lockdown. It might not necessarily be full political commitment to that. And it was really only when a huge proportion of the community turned up in Canberra at Epic and started posting and in fact, tagging me saying I should be there with them, which,
wow.
that really pissed me off.
Yeah, I can imagine, because that was a fucking atrocious bit of misbehavior. People were just behaving like absolute animals.
Yeah, and, it was incredible to see people I knew very well as locals, as whatever they did. And, we all lived in the bush, so we're all a bit crazy, but...
Yeah, but there's a line.
There's a line, and I thought many of these people knew it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I thought the same. Like, I've come back from a background of sort of conspiracy theorists in the form of the New Age movement with, my bringing up of my parents and all their friends and stuff like that in the sort of psychic fair circuit. And one of the things that astonished me was when I realized that the editor of Nexus magazine, Duncan Rhodes, who was one of the guys that we used to sort of hang out with, we'd go for sort of, dinner after these things. And he was a cool guy. He got Trump pilled. And I just thought, oh, okay, you're all fucked. Like, if the guy who's been writing out conspiracies for this long can fall for a con man like Donald Trump, then maybe you're all fucking just kind of daft. Because that's just, I can't get behind someone who can fall for such an obvious scam. But yeah, he's totally Q-pilled. I mean, all power to him, but I've got no respect for that.
No, and it led to, a few tensions in the community, and after the Delta lockdown ended, I finally got back there and turned up at the pub, and someone I'd call one of my best friends just hopped out of a car. I went over to say good day after the long period of long time no see, and just literally had a bit of a shoulder dug into me, and just the words uttered, "You wouldn't believe what it's like to be unvaccinated."
Wow.
We tried again and later met up.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Fucking
straight away,
victimhood.
like no hesitation. And we later had, I think she had some stuff of mine I needed to get, and we met up at a cafe, and of course they couldn't go in. So I said, "No dramas, I'll get you coffee."
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And then just sort
That's
of
funny.
took a long rant of, I think it started with, saying, "Do you know Palaszczuk's building death camps in Queensland?" Being the quarantine centre.
Yep.
And on and on. And
Yep.
it was at that moment I realised how deep everyone had gone. I still wasn't able to gauge it as to whether this was happening all over the country in similar locations. But as it turned out, the true test of numbers is a poll, and the local booze got 4.6% BOSI vote in the New South Wales.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
I think.
If little old Wollombi was New South Wales, BOSI would be in the upper house.
Yeah, fucking right. Yeah, that's pretty terrifying. People like to shit on some of these electoral results. It's similar to the situation where they'll get 50,000 people to one of their rallies at the peak of lockdown, and they'll call it 1 million. Mate, 50,000 is incredible. Why would you downplay 50,000 by calling it 1 million and making yourself look dumb? That's mental. Even to one of these fringe, dumb, save the kids, all trans people are pedophiles and nonsense, you have, maybe, say, 60 people turn up. You will be very lucky to get 60 people to turn up to a fringe event on the left. And if you saw a collection of students that had 60 people in it down at, say, Martin Place, campaigning for fucking, some niche iceberg being preserved in Greenland, you'd be like, all right, well done, kids. You got a crowd. But no, they have to make it 1,000 people. They have to just make the cooker numbers, of course. I find that very frustrating because they've had some incredible achievements when it comes to these sort of activist movements. But because everything in their lives has to be hyperbolic fantasy land, it just becomes inauthentic, just like everything. But of course, it's all based on inauthentic information anyway. So, I mean, I don't know why the fuck I'm expecting them to have any shred of honesty in their real world behavior when their internet personas are basically just, dystopian fan fiction, which is just sort of embarrassing and sad to watch. Anyway, so yeah, it's sort of like, that you've got that sort of community split vibe where you've got all these mates and you've basically just seen them just get immediately peeled. And now, as being like a sort of activist, you're now seeing yourself at rallies, but these people are still there, or are they not turning up anymore? And if they are turning up, are they trying to basically peel people on the fringe?
Look, I wouldn't say the people at Wollombi were necessarily activists within the environment movement, but they certainly were mostly supportive of
Green
what I did.
Causes sort of thing.
Yeah, it's quite an incredible polling booth, that one, in that the last 3 federal elections have each gone to Labor, the Coalition and the Greens, in terms of a first preference vote at the booth. Yeah, so that's what I loved about the place. It was diverse. It was you could yabber away with anybody and get a real range of approaches.
Okay,
but not previously insanely cooked.
Yeah, okay.
But as far as the greater, my history within the conservation movement in New South Wales, and in fact the general lefty ratbag movement goes back into the late 80s with mainly forest protests, but also anti-war and varying roles from being a ratbag frontliner on a blockade to paid NGO positions and negotiating policy with both Liberal and Labor governments, actual ministers, premiers, the works.
I feel like in a Cooker's scenario, they can't really do that because it almost jumps the shark for them, because they can't go in there and be like, okay, now hear me out. I think we should hang basically all the doctors and nurses. And also, no, hold on. No, I know you look really shocked, but we're going to include the hospital administrators as well. Okay? Oh, no, okay. I can see you're upset. We'll just jail them for life with no parole. Is that how we go?
And by the way, this is Simeon, the Russian agent. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, he's not a Russian agent. He's just a Russian aficionado. It's fine. Don't read the news. The mainstream media is obviously lying to you. So, just ignore that part. He's just here. He's mostly here for your snacks. He's heard that Parliament House has a good snack bar, but he's very disappointed in the fact that these officers, they only seem to have sparkling wine. I guess that's what happens when Bruce Lemon works there. Oh, sorry. Anyway, so, when it comes down to it, the thing that I find frustrating is that Cookers, they appear to be bored. They've had their pandemic moment. They've had their sort of raison d'etre, and it's been taken away from them. Now, you still have them whinging. You still, since Dan Andrews retired, they're still going on about Dan Andrews. Fuck, I was in a Twitter war recently with some absolute knob, and he brought up a Dan Andrews thing, and I just thought, why? Like, what? When will you stop? When will you get past this? But then they seem to move on to Drag Queen Story Hour, and that was their sort of, cause to save the children. I feel like that's almost petering off because they're kind of bored of it. Like, it seems like Cookers are addicted to the thrill of activism, and yet they have no politics, and they need something to fill that void. And the Drag Queen Story Hour thing hasn't gone that well for them because it tends to be about 7 of them, and they look like complete cunts. There's no way around that. You look like assholes. You're yelling at children and basically telling them that by being there, they're all going to hell or whatnot. It's just embarrassing to be around. And I think even some of them are probably getting a sort of cringe vibe from that. What are they up to? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's really weird that, I think during one of I think it was when they were posing as the trade union march, one of those 2021.
Yeah.
September, the September 21 in Melbourne.
Lizzie Rose, famously a CFMEU member.
Yes. And,
come on. You're not fooling anyone.
I think, was it Tom Tarnacki, examined their sort of mechanics of the protest, and, it was, you did actually start throwing stuff first, and you're marching around without first aid, without any of the normal measures responsible protests organisers would take to, ensure their own and public safety and make damn well sure you
protests always have.
Yeah, and it's something that's obviously been, key to direct environmental action is you got to be on your best behaviour or they fry you. So there was that.
Yeah, they do anyway, but yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking ridiculous.
And this just didn't apply. There was no respect to anybody, from to themselves, to the teenage retail workers, to anybody, anybody at a vaccination clinic or
fundamentally
whatever.
Self-centered movement, really. It's, it comes down to very selfish tenets, It always has. And the fact that that's sort of like, being reflected in their sense of activism, I really do genuinely think that a lot of them just do it for the sake of the thrill. And I think a lot of people in traditional activist circles do the same thing as well. But I don't think they do as much virtue signaling as the freedom movement types do.
Yeah,
I'm doing this for you. I'm saving you from a fate worse than death. Fuck off. You're not saving me from anything. I just want you to go home. Shut the fuck up.
Oh, there's I've definitely sat on numerous protests and blockades, the sort of dug in ones that go for months, and you're just in the bush, and it's the temperature's hitting the minuses and everyone's getting crusty and conspiratorial. Ooh. And it's happened to me. I do understand that element of it.
Yeah.
And sort of do respect the 400-yard stare, that crazed stare of Brad Bevan when he looks across Parliament lawn at you.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll get to it later, but old Jesse, he was down there in Canberra, sort of hanging out, but he, because I've seen him at a couple of events that we've been to, and he susses things out. He's scary. I don't like it. Yeah, very sketchy. He's got that sort of if you crossed a sort of a meerkat with a sort of a comic book zombie, you'd get him at a rally, just looking at everyone, but also just looks like he's been sort of somehow splashed with sort of toxic slime and turned into a sort of Marvel superhero that resembles a sort of meth addict who was born in a paper bag. It's quite terrifying.
Yeah, and oh god, I've been places where, quite rightly, you've been concerned that you've been infiltrated. But I mean, God, if you infiltrated that movement, what would you find anyway?
They broadcast everything that's worth knowing. Yeah. I can't imagine, one thing that I do find astonishing about this movement is that nothing real world sort of stochastic terrorism wise has happened. And what I can say is that I think the fact that their entire ideology and their entire mindset is based on an elaborate LARP means that they're not the kind of people who will turn into Timothy McVeigh types, who will convert this into real world violence. Because when you look at people who do execute these kind of horrific events, they don't tend to, from what I can see, live in fantasy land. Whereas these people, they're just comic book characters. And I think the comic book would become more of a documentary if they became actual sort of terrorists. This is, we amble and stuff accepted because these are exceptions to the rule. But I was expecting definitely someone to, take a pressure cooker and put some nails in it by now, and they haven't. And thank Christ for that. But I'm astonished with the amount of rhetoric and sort of incendiary discourse that goes on between these people, and the way in which they do mobilize and they do turn this from an internet LARP into this sort of real life community of sort of like-minded psychopaths. Nothing's happened. And, to their credit, to their merit, or just to their design, and the fact the entire thing's just a fucking LARP.
Yeah, well, certainly the handful of individuals up this way in the Hunter that I do have some concerns about, they have no online presence that I can find whatsoever.
That's what I find scary. Not the ones like Guru who are there beating their chest and saying they talk to God on a personal basis. Those fucking idiots aren't going to do anything. They're loving it. They're having a great time. It's the scary loners, Even your Travis Bickle's not going to do anything because Travis Bickle wants the attention. For the Taxi Driver reference for anyone who's not into the film. But yeah, you guys can skip that if you haven't seen the movie. But that's the thing. You get off on that infamy and you get off on that hero complex and you're saving the kids and you're doing the right thing and you are eventually you move to that point where you're purging society of degeneracy. And in his form, it came with, sort of prostitutes and whatnot. And in their situation, it turns out to be drag queens. And it's going to be God knows what next. But the thing they've done pretty hard is they've started pivoting toward environmental issues and getting into that, which sort of almost feels like full circle, because I'd argue that, like, not all of them, and like you say, like, a lot of the guys in Wallenby weren't in activist circles beforehand. But if I look at the sort of like the general sort of cookerdom of my sort of new age friends and things like that from God knows way back, a lot of them did tend to be, if not activists in an active sort of sense, they certainly were like Greens voter types. And now, I mean, like, if I look at their Facebook profile with a sock account, because they've blocked me all, they've all blocked me, but it's just anti-trans, pro-fossil fuel, just like far right talking points. These fucking people used to vote Green. I just find it baffling. But now it seems like they're doing full circle and they're trying to save the fucking environment.
That's right. And I've seen, it was funny, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He was a former forest blockader and now he's a union leader. And we were actually saying, what was it when we were sitting, it's -8 degrees on the Victorian border in a winter's night, and we're all, talking around the fire, and a couple, maybe more of these people have since gone on to become involved in the freedom movement in some way. And, what we did we didn't see that. We were all on the same page, and people played their roles, whether they cooked or built structures or did whatever, and some went lobbying in Canberra. The information and the science behind, a good environmental protest, if you're going to get into the direct action phase, it can only succeed with good science and a good legal case backing you up. You have to have a strategy. And what didn't these people see at the time about where we were taking it, and thought these things were all part of a sort of magic, culty fairy tale that, between good and evil.
Yeah, that's what they sort of need. They need that hit of endorphins.
Yeah, that's it. So, were they ever there anyway, or just, there for the ride? It's hard to tell. But
it is hard to tell. And also, like, possibly being on the right side of history with things like that, which, generally speaking, the sort of the mainstream position of anyone who wasn't a fuckwit was left of centre at least. But generally speaking, the further left you were, the more, righteous you were, because these are good causes. Who doesn't want to see penguins thrive? And now they're convinced that the only way penguins can live is if they're breathing in carbon dioxide from fucking coal dust. It's just cooked. They've been manipulated because, they are sort of rubes. But yeah, I mean, like, when it comes to the thing, they just sort of get off on A, believing on the right side of history and, having some sort of hero complex, and B, I think having a feeling that somehow they can impact things and they can make a difference.
Yeah. So, and it's funny, the further I sort of, when I decided to pay a bit more attention to the movement, and, after 30 years, I was a bit done with environmental campaigning. I thought I've got some time to look into this, so I did. And, I went on what was the pathway, probably QAnon Anonymous and Passaran and you guys, and it seemed to be pretty much covered, so I think it's always a good thing to get really interested in what's going on really locally, which sort of met with the establishment of my place in the end, which was, Steve Bannon-esque, purpose-built to be a local recruitment thing.
Yeah, I think they definitely took a lot of cues from the sort of stuff that is, extensively discussed on QAnon Anonymous, which is the local groups, whether it be the sort of like the recent Mums for Liberty thing, or whether it just be the school halls they hijacked. But that was the thing, there was like a banner in the background saying, this is where it is. It's local. I think Flynn was saying that as well, and it worked, because once the order came from the top, people just went, okay, well, this is what we've got to do. And they did it almost impressively. If they were on your side, you'd be stoked, because they're so effective, and they turned up. And that's the interesting thing, the left can be tricky because some of them turn up to everything but a lot of them, including myself, don't turn up at all. Whereas I find that while there's 10 times more lefties, there's a fraction of these people, but they always fucking turn up.
Yeah, they do the social really well. And you know, the kind of rhetoric that comes back at them from, I guess, our circles to an extent, you know, about alcoholics and meth heads, I don't find to be true at all.
No.
In fact,
there's examples of it, but not really.
Yeah, but, you know, it was funny. You know, I went to one particular Christian event in Sydney when the whole anti-trans thing was happening around Newtown and threatening to get violent. Well, it did get violent.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
And, oh, God, it was held in a leagues club. And, you know, the first thing me and my mate did was go and get a beer from the licensed bar that was, we sort of went and sat back down at the table and looked around and just went, oh, shit, that was a mistake.
No one's drinking.
No one, and they were staring at us. And anyway, we finished that very quietly, and luckily the bartender was pretty spun out by what he was witnessing in front of him too, so I organised vodkas quite successfully after that. But
that's very good. Yeah, we are definitely the bigger pissheads when it comes to these things, and you know, we'll get to the last thing we went to. Oh, yeah, exactly. Like, you know, when I went to the ones in Coffs Harbour, they had no bar there, and I asked them about it, and that was that thing where I went to the canteen guy and basically said, oh, okay, look, you know, you guys going to do a bar? No. You guys got live music on later, but there's no bar. And he's like, yeah, but all the regulation thing was too hard. You had to bounce and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's government, you know, government control. And he just looked at me like I was the biggest asshole. And I'm like, fuck, I'm the cooker. Like, I was just trying to fit in. And it's like, it turns out, no, he thinks that, like, actually alcohol should be regulated and that we maybe should have security guards if we're going to get people pissed. Fuck, now I look like a cock. Yeah, it's very silly. Very silly indeed.
Yeah.
But, they do make you want to drink.
Yeah, so you know, it's interesting how the localisation, I think, is the biggest success they've had. And it's ongoing.
Yeah, well, it is ongoing, absolutely.
And the further, just getting back to where we were going, the more time we put between us and the days of anti-lockdown protests and that whole time, the more they're going to drift back to what sort of was always going on with organised right-wing activity, which in many cases was anti-environmental, with a pro-fossil
anti-Muslim
fuels
sentiment was a good one.
Yeah, and that certainly seems to be what's happening with this pivot to anti-wind energy. You know, I'm fairly aware there's a broad audience of the Conditional Release podcast that is neither left nor right, but it's the missing.
We've got all sorts of colours when it comes to the political spectrum.
I'm not just being a preachy environmentalist. It goes beyond that to the whole cooked nature of misinformation and allowing the community to have a fair conversation about anything that's proposed, you know, for their valley or ocean, as it turns out in this country.
Yeah.
You know, so they've just had a big rally in Martin Place today. Wasn't as big as they said it would be, which was good, but
what was the plan? What were they hoping for?
So it was, the Reckless Renewables rally, which was supposed to be concerned locals coming to Sydney to protest wind farms off their coasts, but it also shared the name of a rally that had taken place in Queensland back in August.
Okay, interesting.
And that was against a land-based wind farm up there that don't quite have the intimate details of that one being in Queensland, but I think there's a bit of forest clearing and koala habitat involved there. But
okay, no, that was the koala clubbing claim, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's where that. They said that the Labor government was going to club koalas to death with a hammer. I mean, it doesn't sound great. But, it was just a thing they picked up from the environmental plan that referred to...
Well, it's that thing of, like, a lack of context. I mean, like, basically, it said, like, you know...
Yeah, twisting it.
if an animal is injured in this process, despite all of the controls that are put in place, which there were many, then the most humane thing to do would be to basically immediately club them over the back of the head with a metal pole. Because if something gets in the way of this, no koalas have been injured, and the amount of annoying red tape involved in the process would be driving the workers fucking nuts. Because the moment they see anything that even remotely resembles a fucking koala, they have to put a 30-meter exclusion zone around it. And they'd be going nuts because it'd happen more often than not, and they'd have to fucking go and do this and relocate them and spend a week on it. But that's the thing, man. Like, you know, I totally agree with saving the koalas. If you're going to rock up, you're going to fuck up their habitat, you have to at least, you know, make sure they're okay.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that these people were absolutely nowhere when, you know, State Forests of New South Wales were clear felling koala habitat for wood chip and not finding any koalas in their pre-logging surveys where everyone else could.
Well, you see, the thing is that
this just went
they hadn't been told to by the fossil fuel industry. So, you know, they have to wait until a talking head like fucking a Tucker Carlson type gives them the go-ahead to go and, you know, find a cause.
Exactly. So yeah, you rarely have people who were nowhere to be seen giving a two fucks for the environment, I guess, ever.
Yeah.
As the leaders of this. And then you do have a number of old, you know, just a handful of former people you formerly knew as being in the environment movement. It was interesting when I started digging into the various freedom groups around the Hunter Valley. I mean, I guess with a population of 500,000, it's still just small enough for everyone to know everyone in some way.
Yeah.
And you just see these names coming up that, you know, often just went, ooh, that's interesting. And, you know...
Bruce Shillingsworth was legit.
Absolutely.
He was totally legit. You know, it was a water activist.
I used to sit in on Murray-Darling Basin Plan meetings with Bruce, and he was impressive, spoke very well, and still to this day I've seen him pushing back at a bit of the more stupid climate change denial rhetoric he's been engaged with on his page.
Well, I think that's like, I'm not surprised to see that, but one thing that I can say is that when we were at that rally, the recent one, and he was there, and when Bosie claimed that as a disciplinary measure, Indigenous sort of groups, nations, whatever, would cut open a young man's penis and it would explode like a hot dog in a microwave. And just seeing him hear that and immediately storm forward to the front part where they were getting the Q&A, receiving the questions, he was ignored and passed over. He didn't ask a question, but then he went to the stage and insisted that he go up to speak on the stage. And I thought, oh, fuck, this is going to be a smackdown.
Yeah.
This is going to come out and be like, what is this hot dog shit you're talking about, you fucking liar? Nah, he just came out there and said, oh, it's lovely to see you all. It's lovely to see you all out here. It's great. You fucking sell out.
It was amazing nothing happened from the absolute steam you could see coming out of his ears when Bosie first said that.
I could not believe that he got a chance to go up and correct the record and he chickened out at the last second.
Yeah, it was
because he wants the clout. He wants to keep his clout. He knows, if he's smart enough, he knows that if he goes up there and tells them all they're fucking assholes and they've got it wrong, instead of them saying, oh, I'm really sorry, we respect your culture and that was a mistake, they're going to go, oh, Bruce has gone wrong.
Yeah, well...
You know, they're not going to listen to him.
And Bosie would have just started talking about pygmies or something.
Oh, fuck me. He just would have just... Or, of course, he would have just said, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I do, because X, Y, Z, and, you know, I know this because I've experienced it. And everyone's going to take Bosie's side because he's a charismatic cult leader. You know, what would Bruce know? He's just, you know, lived and breathed this his entire life.
Yeah, it's quite insane where he's gone from being a respected water activist to just this endless stuff that he's carrying with him now.
Yeah, it's just cooking nonsense.
Yeah,
it's a little bit sad. So one thing I guess you probably know about back in the day was the moment where it almost felt like time and space stood still and exploded when fucking Alan Jones became a fucking greenie and locked the gate and the coal seam gas movement got Alan Jones on side. So look, it's not the first time that the sort of far right elements have decided, hold on a second, maybe the environment, maybe the Greenies have a point. But someone like that who's just been bashing Greenies for his entire career, I mean, maybe he had some skin in the game, and maybe it turns out there was a coal seam gas thing going up near his property. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's not new that far-right elements will join the environmentalist movement, but it's always going to be something that people do a double take on. So it's like, what did you find with the coal seam gas? What did we learn from that? Or what did we not learn from that?
Well, just mentioning prior to SG and coal mining, we managed to get Alan Jones on board on this. There was a ridiculous proposal to build a silicon factory in Lithgow and fuel it with millions of tons of timber from New South Wales' public forests. So it was just a mega logging proposal. This is going right back to 2002. It was stupid. And so there was going to be a silicon factory in...
Is it silica or silica?
You're getting me there.
Is it the building material or is it for the technology?
It's for the technology.
Wow. So okay, that's really interesting.
This is going back 21 years, so my memory's a bit stretched, and they were going to complement that with the charcoal factory to make the charcoal in Mogo on New South Wales' south coast. So some local down there was owed a favour by Alan Jones. God knows what it was. But we were all instructed to, turn up, having a symbolic blockade of the Princess Highway at 5 a.m, which, no one was driving along it anyway. Alan Jones landed in a helicopter and gave a speech, took off. It was all over in 5 minutes, and nothing shifts.
Turned up in a helicopter.
Nothing shifts a New South Wales Premier's opinion as quickly as Alan Jones. So, and then going into, I was working for Lock the Gate in the Hunter, and he certainly was on board, certainly on the mine proposed around his land down in the Southern Highlands. But
also he did have skin in the game, of course he did.
Yeah, but then also on, mines that threaten, traditional farm. Lock the Gate isn't necessarily an environment organisation. It works with farmers. I mean, it might be full of environmentalists working with farmers. But that's how that ran. So Alan Jones was a big supporter of, and it's a brutal game. You get him on, you win.
And you've got to swallow your pride a little bit there.
Oh, it does feel very weird. But he says the spiel, almost, he was, God, I watched him today. He spoke at the anti-wind farm rally. I think it's getting a bit past him. They were trying to wind him up.
Oh, shit. Put the orchestra on.
It was gibberish.
That's very funny. And also, I guess the standard of speaker and content was probably pretty fucking low. So the fact that he was a standout bad speaker when there were probably people there just absolutely talking nonsense is pretty impressive. Yeah,
it was good. I only watched half of it. There was Ruddock and Barnaby lurking behind, and the One Nation crew. It really, I don't think it's done them any favours in terms of pretending to be a local grassroots movement. There's already, been clear cases of misinformation as this movement built up. The one where they pretended that I think it's Marine Policy Journal had said 400 whales. Yes. Unfortunately, the editor of the journal happened to live in Wollongong, so saw it and said we never published that. So, and there's cookers in these pages just brushing off, a huge ethical no-no as just, part of the game. And, interestingly, a lot of the graphics and material that have been associated with this new build-up in anti-wind and anti-renewables rhetoric have been traced back to Advance Australia. So we're right in there with the characters who, misinformed the referendum, and it's just got that stench of, all the think tanks and, possibly minerals councils being behind it.
Wouldn't
And
surprise
of
me for a
course,
second.
Dutton's all too happy to run with that.
He suddenly cares about whales.
Yeah. And he could barely keep a straight face while saying it, which is saying something.
Yeah, well,
It's quite interesting. You can hardly see it gaining traction with the ALP, and even getting to a position with unions and the steelworks and these wind farms are slated for areas like the Hunter and Illawarra, because as the energy market diversifies, these are the places with existing transmission facilities and industrial bases, and as coal eventually dies out, obviously not as quickly as some of us would like, and maybe it'll always have a role to play, but the planet's heating rapidly. Yeah, these places have been slated for alternative energy projects, to help transition a workforce and keep the area viable as a community.
Was the thing, people wanted jobs, it's saying, climate change is going to kill these jobs, the miners are going to lose all these jobs, and then they're like, okay, cool, don't worry, we got you. We're going to build a wind farm, and all these guys, they're going to do very similar work. It's going to be really easy to transition them onto this, and they're like, no, we don't want it. And it's like, pick a lane, guys. I'm tired. Pick a lane. You can't have both.
Yeah, well, even going back to, how did the Hunter Valley become a bit of a cooker haven, goes back to the 2019 election, which, for a while they all expected Shorten to win.
Yes.
But you had this big anti-ALP rebellion here, which came about with Joel Fitzgibbon leaving the party.
Yeah, and their jobs.
And a 21% One Nation vote in the seat of Hunter, and that went to a guy by the name of Stuart Bonds, who somewhere in between becoming One Nation's golden boy in 2019, had a falling out, actually in one of the pubs here, with Mark Latham over the casualisation of the workplace, which was, for a while in the mining boom, everything was great for, jobs. You got your mining job, you got your big 5-bedroom mansion, you had your boat, you had your SUVs, and then the casualisation started, and Stuart Bonds stood up against that, and Latham didn't really give a shit. So, you watch Stuart posting, he's cooked as hell, he'll still back One Nation, but what that might have been had he remained solid going into the 22 election. We still had a 21% far right vote here, but it was split to all hell.
Well, this is what Jack's been saying recently, which is a good reminder that One Nation preferences don't necessarily go far right. Often it'll be a One Nation primary vote and then a Labour preference. And this is the thing, a lot of these One Nation people are just kind of racist working class folks.
Yeah, and I'm in the thick of it here, and there's some beauties to the community as well as the atrocities, but it was interesting, the whole One Nation thing is that certainly in New South Wales, and it's probably different a little bit in other states, but it all, the nuances are, they're never far away from what cookers are doing. And certainly in the referendum, I came across one case here where an LNP candidate in the Hunter had approached One Nation to ask them to engage with my place specifically, but cookers in general, to recruit for the No campaign. And I also saw similar up around the Coffs Coast and heading south towards Kempsey. So, that's hardly the smoking gun to say that's a statewide sort of pattern, but circumstantially, you know, it was quite funny. The Liberal candidate approached the One Nation guy. He organised a meeting in a park down at Lake Macquarie. So all these cookers went down to meet the Liberal candidate who was organising the No campaign for the Libs locally, and they managed to meet him in the park at exactly the same time they were having a smart living fair run by the local council. So the park was full of tech heads and smart city people. And so they had an absolute panic and had to relocate. It's absolutely
that is
beautiful.
So dumb. That is ridiculous. God.
But yeah, so it's interesting. Like I was saying, the more time that passes between the pandemic and now, I just think you'll have the far right falling back to its usual tricks, which, you know, immigration and
using them to sort of explain off rising rents and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that weird crossover into the environment movement has certainly reached a peak down on the Central Coast, which was something I came about started with My Place, actually. And, you know, throughout the Delta lockdown, the freedom movement in Newcastle had been pretty quiet, but underneath it all, it was building, you know, quite strongly. There'd been a few rallies, and then you know, things based around the Cali Hotel in Singleton, which we all know and love. Bless. Really, there hadn't been that big thing, but then, you know, the beginning of this year, there was a big rally, you know, the first one for ages, and it was against NBN television it was just called The Media is the Virus, which I think they picked up from England, actually, and cookers over there, and they all went to NBN on a Saturday, and it was one of the, you know, it was the first thing I went to this year, and it was everyone wear white, so it had a bit of a Unite and White vibe. And then
interesting.
I didn't know why they were there. It was, you know, fuck the media, we're at war. But it was also at the time My Place had kicked off in Melbourne, and, you know, the number of My Place branches was exponentially expanding and outside of Victoria, and you just knew that this lot were going to be the spine of My Place in the not too distant future. And, you know, My Place launched, I think it was only 2 or 3 weeks later, and funnily enough, the Hunter's a big place, so My Place were covering, I think, 5 council areas for you know, disruption and smart city stuff and rainbow story time attacks, and then, you know, the bloody food and well-being and, oh God, you know, whatever the compulsory committees are. And so at the My Place launch, there was, you know, they covered Maitland, Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, Dungog, and sort of asked people to split into the groups depending on where they were from, and there was no Cessnock, and I was sort of going, what's happening with Cessnock? And it was Cessnock special. You know, you don't often hear people call Cessnock special at the best of times, but
well, maybe in a sort of sarcastic tone.
But yeah, and I had no idea what they meant by that for a while, but it did occur to me to see what was going on here, and I started checking out, you know, really having a look at who was on our council, which I had been pretty naive to, actually. It's just, you know, Cessnock's just an out-and-out working-class coalfield labour town. It always has been. But yeah, started checking out the independents, and holy crap, there were 3 cookers, and one and her brother were actively in My Place. So that, and they were disrupting on smart cities and encouraging, you know, sometimes up to 100 people to burst into council, and all the stuff you saw Soz and Sandy covering in Melbourne, really. So, yeah, Cessnock was touched upon in that 7:30 report, mainly due to the behaviour of that councillor, but it also turned out she had a bit of a mentor down on the Central Coast to Kate Mason, who, funnily enough, I saw lurking behind the scenes at the rally in Sydney today, at the anti-wind rally.
Okay. Did you go there or did you watch?
I watched, good on you, Chris Goveries. You're just a trooper, aren't you?
Pest.
Yeah.
He makes his skin crawl, and I feel bad for him because that's an affliction, a very sort of incel-like affliction where, some people are just sort of inherently repulsive like that. And I feel really sorry for that thing because it's very difficult to get through life when people just sort of interact with you and just sort of go, oh, I'm unsettled around. You make me feel unsettled. You're not comfortable to be around. And that sucks because, I think deep underneath there is a good person in there, but I think he's just been co-opted by clowns, appeasers, and love bombers. And I think he's probably, I don't know any of this for any sort of fact at all, so it's pure speculation. But I imagine he probably had a bit of a shit time during school. So I do feel bad shitting on him. But at the same time, generally speaking, he just gives me a very creepy vibe. And I imagine that's probably something that's sort of haunted him through his life. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, he was out there today and
asking people about the weather, which is one of his sort of favourite little things to do. Very cute. Very strange. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Ironically, the weather are the thing that's trying to change the weather by pissing fossil fuels into the atmosphere. But yeah, we won't go into that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, it's... so Kate Mason, who seemed to be feeding our local councillor here all her lines and smart cities conspiracy material, she came up here to give a talk, which was at one of the local bowling clubs on a Sunday, attended by a couple of hundred people. There was the Worldwide Rally for Freedom in Newcastle, which they also managed to coincide with a rainbow story time. So we had a bit of a protective crew out the front of the library. And then I rushed down to the Central Coast to see Kate Mason do exactly the same talk again with Jess Jerd,
Interesting.
the Cessnock councillor down there.
Oh, she's Cessnock. Okay.
She's Cessnock.
Yeah, she's a Cooker councillor. Yeah.
She is. And so they were doing a Smart Cities presentation, but also made sure that the crowd were left in no doubt that if you voted yes to the voice, you were ushering in Smart City doom for all of us.
Yeah, that's just incredibly stupid. I'm sure they had a reason, but it's obviously made up, but I'm sure it was just equally silly.
The PowerPoint just had no segue whatsoever. It leapt from one page to the other, and you kind of go, huh?
Yeah, I bet.
But with a bunch of cooked units in Kincumber all nodding away.
Yep.
And so I started to get quite interested in Kate's group, Community Voice Australia, which is one of those groups you put Australia in the name in case you ever take over the country and become national. And it's really just Community Voice Central Coast. But she does have a following. And she tends to run these monthly events down at Kincumber Neighbourhood Centre. Interestingly, that was the venue that cancelled Bosie's election rally there and said they weren't aware of the nature of what was going to be spoken about. But they're very happy to host Kate every month. And Kate's as nasty as they come. It's anti-trans. And Bosie often shares the posts, actually.
Interesting.
And she was a candidate for IMOP before the Community Voice thing, and she claims to have come from a sort of social welfare background.
Okay. But once again, even if it's just a bullshit claim, a left-leaning kind of thing, and now probably rails against communism. It's like, mate, social welfare is quite often about the state facilitating assistance to those who are vulnerable, which is kind of what Marx was talking about at times. And now you're just, pilled?
Yeah, I mean, you run for... I mean, I only really looked at IMOP through Michael O'Neill and not really the sort of lackeys he had running in other seats and areas. But
yeah,
so missed some of Kate's work. But I have looked back through her videos and you see she out and out states that her two biggest inspirations, personally were coming from the climate denial thing. And she claims to be an environmentalist, but sort of delights in bringing somebody on, and they discuss how the old school environmentalism is dead. Now, her 10 or so events over the year at Kincumber have included Vote No to the Voice, Are Renewables Rarely Green, Save the Bees from the, dastardly cull from the varroa. And then most recently she had a Save the Forest meeting, which combined with a more local case in Carryong with a housing development proposed by the local Aboriginal Land Council. Now, I won't go into too much of the development side of it because I think it really should be addressed by a First Nations person, around issues, people basically claiming to be a non-existent Aboriginal tribe.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
And Soz and Sandy are all over that, and you should expect an excellent podcast next year, I reckon. So I bumped into this not from the First Nations perspective, but from what was happening with the environment movement, where in terms of the, Sydney, Greater Sydney now has what's called a 6 cities strategy from Illawarra to the three main, and up to Newcastle. And it's all been woven into the smart city conspiracy thing by our friends. And the 6 cities commissioner is Robin Parker, who was the former LNP Minister for the Environment back in the Barry O'Farrell era. And there was a bit of a confrontation at, I think it was at Woy Woy down the Gosford end of the Central Coast, where she did a community presentation and some of BOSI's A1 troop caused a pretty big ruckus inside the venue. And then she made a statement saying, she was seeking to form a community advisory body made up of community members to advise on the environment locally. And Kate saw the opportunity and immediately formed an organisation called the Central Coast Community Advisory Central Coast Environmental Advisory Committee.
Okay.
And it was a coalition made up of, I think there was the Narara Eco Village Coast Environmental Alliance, and a handful of other groups and individuals, but essentially all far right. And they launched, they put out a press release, and lo and behold, straight on the ABC to launch, and a meeting with Robin Parker. So they haven't announced anything since, but God knows whether Robin Parker was sufficiently impressed with them to think they speak for the community, let alone the environment.
Yeah.
So it was one of those cases where Kate just jumped straight into the mainstream, and it's hard to tell whether there's been any, whether the ABC's picked up on who they just gave airtime to.
They love fucking that up.
But, there's her Save the Forests thing, and it is quite easy for someone doing what Kate's doing, and in fact cooker groups, to say we want to save a park or save this bit of bushland, because it's no skin off their nose to look like they care about the local environment and ingratiate themselves with, the local community rather than oppose the big policy changes that are needed, such as a cleaner energy grid and things like that. So it's very easy to say we're the ones saving the whatever, and you guys are not.
That's been always the thing of flipping the script on its head and trying to make out that the sort of cooker perspective is actually doing the opposite of what it's doing. Because of course, we say, it's all based on misinformation, disinformation. But the idea that somehow supporting fossil fuels is the environmentalist position. Like when Milo Yiannopoulos was out, the whole thing was being conservative is the new punk rock. And I'm like, mate, being conservative is never going to be punk rock. You can say this as much as you fucking like. I'm never going to take you seriously when you say that being a fucking Nancy Reagan conservative is somehow subversive. I understand your position, and I know it's very smart. but it's also very stupid, and I'm never going to respect it. This is a similar thing. It's like we're the ones saving the whales, and all these greenies murdering whales for their fictitious, climate change narrative. It's annoyingly clever, but it's also incredibly stupid.
Yeah, well, she succeeded in, I'd like to think, fooling a couple of genuine environmental advocates to come and speak at her Save the Forests forum. It did not go unnoticed.
Ooh, that sounds stern.
And well, generally, the environment movement as a whole has been subject to some legitimate attempts to bring it unstuck. So it's very good at smelling a rat. But I don't know. I don't want to be coming from Cessnock. I suppose I'm allowed to be prejudiced towards the Central Coast. It had to happen on the Central Coast, where cookers and environmentalists have merged into this. It's quite a mess. So you've actually got this organisation who do need to be called out, which is Coast Environment Alliance, and I came across them when I had a gig for several years, bit of a niche environmental gig really, while everyone was looking at the climate aspects and the impacts of open cut mining in the Hunter and beyond. I was sort of doing a niche little job looking at the underground impacts on Sydney's, where they were mining under Sydney's water supply, not Warragamba, but the smaller dams down on the Illawarra.
Yep.
And, looking at amazing things like rivers draining away completely and methane bubbling to the surface where you could set a river on fire.
Yeah, that's not good.
There was a longwall underground mine proposed in the Central Coast's drinking water catchment as well at the time, and it was largely under a valley which was full of very rich people and connected people. So it was a good campaign to be involved with. You went down and met with them. They knew what they were talking about. They had connections. They fed you well. It was all pretty schmick operation. And then Coast Environmental Alliance formed, and they asked me to give them a briefing about the mine, which I did. And I quickly got the sense that I started talking technology and figures and predictions and stuff like that. And they really were just looking for the hippie point of view. And I realised I was sort of wasting my time. And it was a bit different. And
they wanted to be fun, I suppose.
And it had that, sort of vague hippie sort of vibe about it. And that's the group that has now gone on to be campaigning for this area up the top near the freeway near Gosford to be saved. And possibly, in terms of the biodiversity on that site, it's the Land Council who's the developer. It's their land.
Yep.
I'm not personally thrilled they want to clear some of it, but the tactics that this environment group have adopted to, say it's a spiritual place and there's aliens there.
Wow, okay.
And as I said, I think it's better I leave it to Soz and Sandy to cover that with someone who's way more, I think, entitled to speak to it than
connected
a white
to
person
the situation.
like myself. Yeah,
that's fair.
But you've essentially got an environment group who's gone into bed with a appallingly racist bullshit cooked position. And, I have been involved in a couple of environmental campaigns where a land council was the developer, and you got to, if you're going to fight it on the basis of, environmental approvals and what the planning system allows. Don't make up
reality.
Shit.
Yeah, exactly.
And in that sense, you got to back the Land Council, which does have a reputation on the coast of being a big property developer. But that's what land councils are about, to give a bit of that equity back. So
they've
they've taken an embarrassing approach, And, the environment movement can't afford to allow them to continue like that. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, losing legitimacy, especially after long-fought battles, just because a bunch of fucking weird dreamers come in and just want to make it an interesting story for them to tell lunch or dinner the next day. Yeah, nah, that's sort of cheapens the whole thing. But this is the interesting thing about, and I think people either make this decision without thinking about it, or they do give it serious thought and wind up doing it anyway. But the cookers are a good renter crowd. If you can get them riled up about something, they'll turn up, they'll share things, they'll organise things, and they may even end up making their own organic little movements. But one thing about that, especially when you get further toward the Bosie fringe, as opposed to the more just general sort of like, fuckwitted sort of like slack-jawed fringe, is that they will take this and they will eventually make it their own, and they'll keep turning up. But when they turn up to the rally, for example, the Vote No rally we went to, they'll start chanting, "Let Guru speak," because they want Guru to speak. And what they want Guru to say is something you do not want to be seen next to, because it will be fucking mental.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Bosie has become too much, even for most cookers in New South Wales.
Yeah, it's crazy shit.
I mean, unless you are happy just sitting there listening to it, and that's what makes you feel better. But in terms of achieving shit, it's fuck all. And people are calling him.
Yeah. There's only so long you can go with this and be like, okay, so where are these white hats you keep talking about? Where are they? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, it was funny. I did get along to that. One of the first events I went to up here was that famous night at the Cali. Guru, Bosie, the surprise guest, and Leibold and Bergworth beamed in via the screen, and Sean Ambrose. It was a absolute feast of, and it was the good chemtrails night and the pygmies, and it was
pygmies.
It was quite interesting just being in that crowd, and it was funny because I had an inkling that friends from Wollombi would be there. It's only 50 k's away, so I stood up the back, and then I did see that at least one friend was there from the vantage point I had. Except because Bosie was the surprise guest, and let's face it, at that time it was only going to be Hoodie or Bose. God, it was going to be one of the peak figures coming out of Epic.
Yeah,
and they started giving hints and dropping clues, and it was clearly going to be Bosie. And so I was just leaning against the back fence of the beer garden, minding my own business, and suddenly the gate next to me, the build-up, and then they all turn the gate, and I'm just there next, and Bosie comes through.
Oh, shit.
And the first thing I see is my friends going, "Dave!"
Oh, no.
"Have you gone down the rabbit hole too?" And I went, No, I'm just here to watch.
Fucking hell. It's like when you go to a wedding and you accidentally stand next to the bit where the bride comes through, and everyone's fucking looking at you like, "No, it's her! Don't look at me! Fuck! Shit! This is not ideal."
Yeah, so, I ended up just shuffling, I went and we shouted at each other beers, and we had a good chat, and I felt, I got a bit grilled about why I was there, but I said, look, it's been my job to know what is going on the New England highway politically for ages. So I'm here, I'm having a listen, and it was quite amazing. But the sense of the crowd, just, you knew the gig. It was like waiting for the most popular song. You knew it until there was a hint or a mention of a hanging. They hadn't got what they came for.
That's it. They hadn't got their hit.
But if you want something more than that, a bit of political clout, well, the sensible ones do go to One Nation, because, they're in Parliament. Not as it was 3, it's now 1. Thanks. They're quite despondent about that. I went along to I'm quite interested in what the Cooker plan is for local government elections next year, because certainly here in Cessnock, the 3 councillors have realised the smart cities and the stuff they were going on about was really cooked. And there was there was a bit of Forest of the Fallen happening around the park, and it just was, people were laughing at them. And so they've pivoted to that. And this goes to, I think, Cameron Wilson from Crikey recently penned a piece about the local government elections in WA and how Cook's councillors had run a pretty tight campaign, you know, down around the southeast Cooker Belt. And
looking like they're getting some actual local council success.
And deliberately avoiding the topics that give them away. And so local Cook's councillors here have now gone to an absolute insane campaign to prevent a road being widened to 4 lanes rather than 2, and instead supporting a One Nation proposal to build a city bypass. So you've got weird little events like they encourage people to get out and measure the road and do cooker maths.
That sounds dangerous.
They're okay so far. They had a rally the other day, but that's sort of what I'm interested in, is where these local government elections are going to go and how coordinated that's going to be. So I did shuffle off to check out a One Nation gathering a few weeks ago, and funnily enough, it was straight after the referendum. So they were actually, you know, I thought they'd be in party mode, but they were absolutely depressed about the other guy and only having Tanya left in Parliament and losing all their funding that comes with that. So, you know, there were people coming up with all these ideas and they're just going, sorry, we've got no money. And some guy was spending his own money to drive a trailer around. There was an interest in running for council in a couple of seats. But what I'm noticing is that my place locally is working very much hand in hand with that. So, it'll be interesting to see. You know, I think council elections are what people should be keeping an eye on, because you're going to get all these independent candidates who no one knows anything about and might well sound completely normal. And in fact, that was happening last time. There was one candidate, wasn't Cessnock, I think it was closer to Newcastle, maybe Maitland. Anyway, he seemed quite normal, and I'd sort of was charting out a bit of a 20-year history of growth of far right voting in the region, and just for my own satisfaction to see if I was worried about something genuinely or didn't have to. But there's a huge growth, and this guy, he nearly got in, and he's, you know, there was a meet the candidate thing, and I just looked for, you know, Twitter posts and just to gauge whether they were far right or not, or whatever I could get, meet the candidates forums, and he seemed totally normal, and I was about to give him a tick of not a cooker, and then just checked a bit more social media, and he spent a drunk evening. He'd had to be drunk, but anyone talking about getting vaccinated, he just replied, R.I.P.
Oh, God. Calm down.
They're bloody everywhere. Yeah.
It's fucking mental. So what I reckon we should look at as a closer is our experiences on the ground at the last 2 rallies in Sydney. First off was the Vote No rally, which was basically, it looked like it was staged by John Ruddock, but it was funded by actual money, and Craig Kelly was there, and I believe that he had a sort of, you know, Uncle Clive envelope involved, because it was a bit of a pay-for-play sort of thing, which is why, as we were saying before, when the crowd were chanting, let Guru speak, they did not let Guru speak. And that was quite a intense crowd. It was very A1 driven, lots of A1 signs, and it was very intimidating. I found it was the first time I'd really been to a cooker rally like that properly. It was pretty intense. You know, we'd been to a My Place thing before the My Place launch in Sydney, and we did a bit of a sneaky reco on that, and that was fine. But it was just a small group of cookers. William Bay spoke and just said shit, and we eventually just sort of left and just went, "This is dumb." But the No rally was intense,
pretty dumb. And My Place Sydney just seems to have what's happening. Nothing really.
Yeah.
But
Different
yeah,
vibe up here.
and they were. It was very late to even kick off, given my place was everywhere regionally in New South Wales before Sydney, and just other groups held the space. Stand in the park and Smoking Joe and Bosie.
Smoking Joe, fuck man,
God love him.
Oh God.
But Guru had been banned from speaking. Bosie was over in WA and he had also been banned from speaking. So this was clearly a decision that was made, and I think they referred to it in the discussions with Cossack, John Ruddock and Craig Kelly. And does that still mean Clive Palmer? God knows.
Yeah.
And it was seething, and it began with the Shillingsworths and the troop of kids who had been brought down to dance and
giving it the
open
cultural sort of legitimacy, which is seriously unnecessary, because that these people are immediately going to turn on a dime the second the referendum's over and start calling Indigenous people lazy doll bludgers or whatever you want to go with. It's coming. It's coming very, very soon. I wonder if Jacinta Price will be surprised by the rhetoric that's about to come out of these fucking assholes' mouths. Anyway, it did feel very much like it was useful at the moment. It would maybe very sort of cringe for the optics on that. Just like, they're using you guys. They're not your friends.
You also had Dee Borah there with her. She was about to go on convoy to her court case in Lismore, and she and all those insane human trafficking nut jobs were hanging with Guru's lot with their awful display of madness.
They did have that thing that had that sort of like big sign with a hodgepodge of like sort of pasted headlines and fake pictures and just nonsense. It was just trash.
So they all were up for a fight, and Beck was steaming around ready to go and fight for Guru and
carrying.
But my favourite was when it ended and Guru, he was all standing around the back demanding to go on, and that was
great.
There was some pretty hefty security. A fair bit of the budget had gone into getting guys who were there to prevent Guru from getting onto the stage, and they were all individually cooked units as well. And then Roland Crystal had taken a position.
That was very funny,
He spent the whole rally just standing near cops because he still wants to be one and fantasises
desperately. So embarrassing. Yeah.
And so when it all blew up and it turned into a screaming match, I sort of went round the back and jumped in there and captured a lot of it. But my favourite memory was Roland just standing on the stairs, sort of
that
watching
was very funny.
The melee, and then Guru stormed back to his sort of area near the stall, grabbed Beck's loudhailer, I think, and did his big howl and scream. But
you were close to that, weren't you?
Yeah.
Because I was further back. And you could not hear a single word he was saying because they turned up the music so loud on the stage. Yeah, they did. That's right. And you could not hear a single word. You just saw this little guy screaming into this megaphone and people around just looking confused. It was great. It was very funny.
Yeah, so just, I mean, that just was an epic schism in the movement.
I think they realised that they are being played. I think that was a moment because when they were talking with Craig Kelly afterwards and we sort of stood around that, they were sort of like bringing up all these cooker things and Craig had to sort of stand there and entertain their bullshit about election fraud and all that sort of stuff, but he couldn't quite bring himself.
The 28.
And the 28.
I think,
he couldn't quite bring himself to go along with it.
Mm.
And he couldn't quite do it because Kelly's not quite there. He believes easy to believe bullshit, but he can't do the 28 and he can't do election fraud properly. He blahs on about like voter ID and stuff like that because he knows it's an easy gimme that he can say with some degree of legitimacy and not like a complete fuckwit. But that was where I think there was this thing. And like when the Guru melee was going on next to the stage with, sort of Roland and the security guards sort of holding him back, and Avi talking to Guru and just being like, I don't know why I'm talking to this guy. He's a fucking idiot. And when Avi thinks you're a fuckwit, you've really fucked it. But there was this one guy who had a go at this women for littering, and I was like, good on you. But we talked about the sausages, the filthy sausages, the fatty, gross sausages they were serving out. And he just goes, I feel a bit funny. I'm like, well, I mean, look, they didn't let Guru speak. How do you know they're not poisoning the sausages? And he's like, oh, fuck. Yeah, no, they probably did, eh? I'm starting to feel a bit funny. I'm like, mate, that sausage could have something in it. You don't know. That's bought by the guys who bought and paid for this stage. Could be bloody vaccinated, mate. Who knows? And he's like, oh, fuck. And he just walked away. It was great. I mean, like, these people, they're just so terrified and gullible. And I felt kind of bad in a way, but he really did start, like, he started going, oh, fuck. Oh, what am I going to do? Like, can't go to a hospital, I suppose. Fuck, shit, I don't know what to do. I think I've eaten a poisoned sausage from the New World Order. Oh, fucking whatever.
It was crazy.
Yeah, it was a very silly event.
And of course, Dan Andrews resigned days later, and there was Cossack pouring all the beer into Melbourne.
Yeah, that's right, with the imported beer from the consulate.
Which...
That was very weird. It would have cost more to send it to Melbourne in a car than it would have cost to buy.
Yeah, well, he's clearly got a budget for it. Who was it who turned up with it? It wasn't Mark Mack. It was...
I feel like it might have been, though.
Was it?
I think he was at least in the camera shot for when it was happening. But I feel like he was the one who was like, hey, free beer. And, of course, everyone kind of knows what happened with Mark Mack and the situation the Tinfoil Tales girls exposed on Twitter. If you haven't seen that, it's worth checking out. And we covered it in the latest premium episode. We had a little bit of a look into that, and it's pretty fucking dark stuff. Then we had the second rally, which was more just like you won't let me speak. Well, I guess we'll have our own rally then, which obviously had a lot less money. No sausages. Very disappointing. The sausages were fucking awful. And Guru did speak. And Guru not only did that, but he also played a soothing rendition of U2 won with old VaxCon. Well, at least I think Mark Mack and Glenn, was it?
Glenn was there. I don't think Mark was there.
Someone was playing guitar. I thought it was Mark playing guitar.
Yeah, I was pretty. I did want to, talk about cook a bucket list. You want to see VaxCon in,
Yeah. Well, maybe VaxCon's going to have a bit of an issue soon, so you might have missed out. I saw Coolio the day before he died, so I can tick that off my list. See Coolio immediately before he dies of some sort of fentanyl overdose. But so when it comes down to that one, the sound system was so awful just because they don't know what they're doing. The sound system itself was just a reasonable PA. But just because they don't know how to fiddle the knobs and they're so arrogant and stupid that they don't actually bother to try and fix it. And like Guru sounds like shit at the best of times, but through a distorted speaker, it was just horrific. It was in one of the episodes we did immediately preceding it. But fuck me, that's torture on the ears.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny thing going to cooker rallies. It's a very strange vibe, but the confidence of some of these people in being so confidently shit is quite something to behold.
Yeah, I mean, again, where did that rally go? There was, if I was a A1
flex
going there to get a sense of direction, I mean, Bosey just repeatedly tells you to do nothing and wait for the white hats.
That's exactly it. That was pretty much what it was. Wait, the white hats are happening, and don't worry, this is our plan, and it's great. We're not going to have sex with children because that's what Muslims do. We're not going to, fucking let you marry cats and dogs because that's what the Germans and the Spaniards are doing. It was very strange. It was interesting, and it's so interesting in the fact that the stuff that he said about like the Germans and Spaniards marrying dogs and cats was that we really want immigration, but we just don't want them to bring their ideals with them. And the crowd found that very difficult to reconcile. Because they're like, do we want immigration, though? Because I'm not actually completely sure we want immigration, to be honest. Bo's like, no, we do. It's like, I guess I should probably just trust the plan, right? Fucking amazing. He's trying to couch racism in socially acceptable fucking communications. Get on board. But yeah, no, he's probably punching above.
There's never material, there's no copies of Greatness Awaits here to make him $30 or whatever.
That being said, you could bring it and get it signed.
You could. Oh, that guy was such a fanboy. It was amazing the adulation as they queued to speak with Ricardo.
Cult leaders, man. Cult leaders are cult leaders.
I found that conversation he had with Charles Mackenzie really interesting. The unvaccinated blood guy.
Unvaccinated blood guy. Yeah. We talked about him in the previous episode as well.
Yeah, and the distance Bosey kept between them it was sort of a weird, unnatural.
Well, you don't want to catch
I
anything,
don't-
right? Fucking would not surprise me if that was the mindset behind that.
And then they all went to the pub, except Bosie and Guru.
That's right. They did go to the pub. We went to the pub.
Which happened to be the pub we just went in looking for Tui's New, and
Yep.
we suddenly realised there was something very different about every single other person in there.
It was
and
quite
us.
crowded too, which
And
I didn't expect. But yeah,
Which was funny because, as is happening most weekends in the capitals now, there was a big
Palestine
rally, which
Yep.
is why Bosie's event was brought forward unlimited to 2 hours, which, and it was clear the cops wanted the A1 crew out before the Palestine one kicked off, and the organisers of the Palestine rally were pretty keen to ensure that any cookers wandering around that rally were known as they're the ones most likely to start spouting anti-Semitic garbage. So there was a bit of a watch being kept on A1ers who were hanging around for the pro-Palestine rally. But for all the rhetoric they gave it, they just went to the pub and drank slowly and ate lunch and sort of hung in their groups. MGG was there.
Yep.
Pitbull.
Yep.
Beck, Jesse.
Craig Cole was very funny. He
mess.
was eating fish and chips, and he looked like he was like every time he put like he stabbed the fish and chips with his fork, lift it up and stare at it like he was going to punch it, and then shove it in his mouth. It was the most violent eating I've ever seen in my life. It was very funny. I found it very, very
Pretty
funny.
scary.
He's a very strange guy. Bless his heart. I'm sure he thinks he's doing the right thing. Yeah, well, look, I must say, on the ground, activism when it comes to these sort of movements is weird. And as someone who is well versed in activism, you can tell the difference between this because you've been to both. And I think I can speak on your behalf by saying that one is cooked and one is not, generally speaking.
No, well, I think most activists can be annoying.
Yes, they can be. Yes,
and that's sort of. But I've always formed a view that most social change for the better hasn't taken place without some level of on the street grassroots stuff, and it's a necessary thing.
Totally. And like some of these activists, while they might be annoying, they turn up, and I can't begrudge them because they turn up. I don't. So
I try to these days.
Well, you seem to be very good at turning up to cooker rallies, though. I must say that's pretty impressive.
It made a nice change in a bent sort of way.
Yes, it's more entertaining, I suppose. It's the whole point. The whole thing's meant to be entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, I still take what emerged out of Epic and COVID very seriously as far as a right-wing threat goes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's... I look at, the National Socialists and those horrible groups, and you see a certain number of people there, but when you're sort of going to these suburban meetings on the edge of nowhere on a cold Wednesday night and there's 60 or 70 people there, and realise it's probably happening in a lot of places you don't know about either. It's definitely got something of a hold in terms of a perceived oppression or people getting something that, they think is missing, that other social networks or whatever don't provide them, and it's full of crap. And, you might have a beautiful looking zucchini on the table, but you're talking hate, and that really pisses me off, and it's very present at the moment. Yeah,
I totally agree. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how it does sort of boil over with a lot of very bored, angry, disaffected, isolated socially and sort of like, mentally in a way, because I don't think these are people with if they do have mental health issues, that they tend to feel like they should get them treated, considering the sort of stigma of taking medication and dealing with traditional forms of assistance in this regard. We thought, well, at least I'll say me. I thought that a lot of people were going to go away and only the extremists were going to stick around. And to an extent, that was right. Insofar as you look at A1 and you look at these people and they are extremists and they have stuck around and they've sort of got nothing else. but I didn't think at the fact that a lot of these people were going to get so excited by the idea of making a difference and being a sort of change maker that they were going to find any fucking excuse to continue being a so-called activist just to get their rocks off and feel like they're relevant and interesting. That I didn't really think about. And I think that's what's happening. I think it's materializing where people who felt pointless now feel like they have a point. But the thing is, the point was that pandemic, the point was freedom. It's very difficult to argue there is no freedom outside of the general delusions that come up about smart cities and fucking dystopian futures. And they just need to find something. So it's drag queens, or it's wind farms, or it's basically whatever the fucking advanced Australia and the fossil fuel industry are going to tell them to do. But they're a renter crowd with no fucking politics. They'll just do whatever you tell them to do.
If you can get yourself into a position where you can control their focus, it's quite handy. And
as long as you're ready for them to do fucked up shit.
They all went to Epic, and like we said, it was a huge protest for Canberra. They should just have claimed the numbers they got,
which was huge.
Challenged anybody to come up with similar. I can't think of one yet. And everyone who went there, regardless whether they got traumatized or stung by a nanobot bee or hit with an LRAD or direct energy. It was funny. We were up. I didn't get to Epic. Like everyone, I just sat there and watched my jaw dropped online and all the mischief that ensued. But I was there about a month later and went up to Parliament Lawn, and it was windy, sort of wet day, and there was still good 200-300 people hanging around, and that Wally character who mysteriously disappeared was sort of the leader, and Dan was around, and we just got there, and then we'd barely been there 5. The people there darkened and got and genuinely traumatized and concerned, and it was sort of like, what's going on here? And Wally had come up with a story that there was a direct energy weapon placed on a light pole that was about to be activated, and we were all about to get fried. So then we all had to flee, just as it was. And the misery of that group was quite profound. So perhaps I've been hit with a direct energy weapon.
Well, maybe you have. I mean, look, let's face it. It's not a bad idea to zap some of these fucking morons. But when it comes down to that sort of thing, it shows that like the guy with the most fanciful story is the most interesting guy in the room, and he's going to captivate the attention. And people want to feel something, whether it's excitement or whether it's fear. They want to feel something. And when he made people feel something, he was the center of attention. So you just keep doing it, because if you've got no relationship with the truth whatsoever, whatever you say gets you attention, gets you position, gets you clout, simply because they go, oh, what's that? Oh, Wally told us what that was last time. We'll go and ask him. And simply just that act makes you relevant, makes you important. And I'm guessing what happened basically is Wally just probably told one too many lies, and eventually someone said, mate, I know you're full of shit, and he just went, fuck, I've been exposed, and bailed. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, there were all sorts of rumours around that. But everyone who went to Epic certainly felt a huge sense of community and empowerment. Probably, I've been to big protests, and they're great if they've got momentum and there's a sense something's shifting, which, deludedly, they all had, because they thought they were going to overthrow the government on any number of given days. And, it was quite interesting watching Epic unfold. And the moment that was always going to be the most interesting for me was who they send in and what they demand. And that, of course, turned into that insane photo of Cossack and Hoodie, Larder and Dindy in there, and Glenda. And quite interestingly, apart from Hoodie and Larter, the crew that's sort of organised the worldwide freedom rallies in Sydney, sitting with Craig Kelly there, and the fallout of Hoodie convincing them to drop the claims about the 28 and pedos to sound a bit more, or a bit less cooked, and a bit more reasonable. Bosey having a tanty about that. And, there are, certainly in my local community, there were a couple of people who did go to Canberra who I've had the opportunity to talk to, and they genuinely were angry at the over-governance of what they saw as, I guess, and didn't like being locked down. Their business had suffered, and they really just wanted to represent that. And it wasn't really important to them who, I said, but did you see the speeches and what was getting, they want to kill this person, these people. Like, if I'd organised if I was involved in organising an event and put speakers on stage who said that, I'd never come back from it.
Yeah.
But that's what you guys put on and you went to, and I mean, for God's sake, the leader of the convoy had a shotty pulled out of his car.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what happened at the Greenies?
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Jim.
Imagine.
Yeah,
the laws would change. The laws would change. Yeah.
That's what dropped it was just what they were getting away with. And for weeks, it still goes on.
And they still complain. They sort of how persecuted they are. They get away with so much.
Yeah, compared with, what any other group would get away with, really.
Yeah. It's
is that
absolute.
just because they're that insane that the cops don't? Or is there a bit of sympathy?
I just don't know. I think there was sympathy.
Gauge.
I think there was sympathy, but I think that sympathy sort of run out if you look at things like, used to call Monica Smith Teflon Mon because, she just got away with everything. But then all of a sudden Consumer Affairs just went, actually, no, you fundraise for illegitimate purposes and we're not happy about it. And it's like, hold on, are these actual consequences? Holy shit, this is actually happening. And Nicholas Reid went to jail for the Parliament House fire. It felt like everyone just got, not only did they get bail, but then they just get no conviction recorded for fucking doing all sorts of crazy shit. But now it feels like the hammer's dropping.
It was the guy who assaulted the worker at the racecourse over from Epic, and didn't just have to be extradited from New South Wales once to go to court, but twice, which that's insane. And he'd made it very clear what his position.
No respect for the court whatsoever.
Absolutely no responsibility for really hurting someone too.
Yep, all happens.
I mean, Jack. It's funny talking with Jack yesterday. Jack was actually pointing out how many crimes get committed and how many get prosecuted. There are people who say, "Oh, you should arrest him. Report this, report that." You just can't. They won't arrest him.
Yeah, it's still worth doing. It's still worth trying. But it's tricky to get them to do it.
It's funny having done pretty naughty things myself and gotten away with some and not others. You're kind of looking at it. It's
tricky to know which one it's going to be.
But once you're into, real violent stuff, it's not cool.
No, not at all. Well, it'll be interesting to see where the cookers sort of wind up over the next little while, because I think this really is that sort of turning point as to where they go, what they do, and how they do it. My place is going to be a scourge on fucking humanity, but my money is that Darren Bergworth is going to fuck this up immensely before they get any real progress. Western Australia, as Cam Wilson has pointed out, is concerning with those local government elections. But it'll be very interesting to see. And I tell you what, we should probably get you back on at some point to get an update on what happens in 6 months' time. What happens in 6 months' time with all this in the future? Because I'm sure there'll be some weird pivot, and I'm sure it'll just be some other really strange thing they just glom onto and just ruin because they're bored on a Saturday and they want something to give them purpose.
Yeah, do you know what I reckon would be a really interesting topic to have going forward would be homeschooling.
Yeah, John Oliver did that recently, and it's very interesting. But one of my friends actually was doing homeschooling, and I had a feeling that the reason why was because she's basically jumped on the sort of the cooker trad wife bandwagon. But that's a whole other story. Well, we've got to go because we've got a 2-hour limit. So we're going to get cut off in a couple minutes. So,
thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, listeners, for sticking in with this one. This was an excellent experience. If you want to see some of the stuff that Dave's been up to, his posts in the Conditional Release Program shitposting group are fantastic. Is there anything you want to plug or promote or talk about?
Not really. Promotion was never my strong suit.
No, I didn't think so. But at the same time, you do have some fantastic posts on the shitposting group. So if you want to see some great content from this man with some like legitimately good insights into what's happening in that universe, which is a universe I don't keep as much of an eye on as I used to. I think you and the Tinfoil Tales girls really know that space very well, and I applaud you for keeping an eye on it, especially in the way that you do, which is through an activist lens to just sort of make sure that everything's okay. A watchful eye, as such. Thanks for coming on the show, mate.
They?
Yeah, they're very
No worries.
special.
Have a good
individuals.
night.
All right, you take care, mate. I'll see you later.
See ya.
I don't think I ever want to talk to any of those people.